Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Beyond Analytics. This podcast is brought to you by Nextlytics. And we have an extended team here at Nextlytics. Two special guests today, Michael Zakur and Matt Mueller. Michael, do you want to introduce yourself? Then we'll go to Matt and then we'll kick off.
Hi, Abhijit. Thanks for having me on. My name is Michael Zakor. I'm the founder and CEO of Five New Digital. We're an agency that works with global brands, retailers, and CPGs, all aspects of digital enablement, online, offline integration, consumer psychology, and the new retail model.
Hi, Abhijit. Thanks for having me. My name is Matt Muller, and I am the founder and CEO of The Mindful Innovator, which is named after the best-selling book, The Mindful Innovator. And I work with CPG and retail brands to help them better understand the why behind why consumers buy, with consumer research like ethnographic, going into the homes of shoppers and even shopping stores alongside them. So glad to be here, part of this conversation today.
That was great, actually. Looks like we have a consumer powerhouse today. And let's start with that, right? Michael, you've always said that there is a massive problem with consumer data. Do you want to kick off the episode by starting a bit about it?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of problems with consumer data, actually, and I would list them in no particular order of importance as there's too much of it, there's too little of it, it's too expensive, it's too unorganized, it's not accessible. So it depends on, which brand, retailer, CPG you're talking to. Either they have massive amounts of data that is either not organized well or they don't know how to put it to work for them, or we're not getting enough data in from our sales channels, partner channels, what have you. And then it's become increasingly expensive to gather, modify, and monetize data itself. So there's a lot of problems in the consumer data industry. And, I think there's a parallel between what's happening in consumer data with the data that we're getting from digital advertising and marketing. So not only is there sometimes too much, too little, too unorganized, but the validity of the data itself is in question. And so when you look at sort of what I call the ad tech or martech industrial complex, data might get pushed through five organizations and five washing machines before it lands back on your desk. And so, you have two problems with data. You don't understand the full validity of it, and then you might have too much, too little, too unorganized. So, it's a real problem here because, we've been hearing for the last 10 years, data is the new oil. Okay, great, but you need to build the wells and the refineries and the gas stations to make that work because the oil is nothing unless, right, unless it's put to its final end use. And so I think as an industry, there's a lot of room for improvement on how we organize, pay for, collect, and refine data. There's a lot of good things happening out there, people trying different experiments, but yeah, it's a big issue right now. It can't be the new oil unless we have a whole lot of cars on the road.
That's an interesting analogy, actually, Michael, right? I mean, Matt, do you want to take this forward and talk about what's the real crux of the problem here?
Yeah, I think Michael hit the nail on the head there with that analogy. That's like a great way to kind of put it out there. But I think when you think about like the way that we're trying to like experiment into some of those experiments we're doing, like look at BI dashboards. They're everywhere. Everybody has a dashboard, and our dashboards sometimes have dashboards. It's just there's so much data, and we're trying to visualize it, put it out there. But I think what it comes down to is that people just aren't using them, not using them properly. I think there's a stat out there that shows that 20% of dashboards are adopted within organizations. That means 80% are not. That's like a lot of dashboards that are not truly being used. And I think the problem becomes a twofold thing. One is that, yeah, we have way too much data for sure. And then we have just these massive walls that are like, wallpaper of all these different pieces of information on it. And it reminds me of a JAM study. So I'm going to bring this back to the consumer side of things, right? So I don't know if have you guys ever heard of the JAM study that was done? So on the West Coast of the United States, they went in, they did a study within a grocery store and put out on a table jams to see if they could sell some, right? So they put out 23 different flavors of jam on this table. And a lot of people came over to see what was going on, to look at all the jams. And by the end of the weekend that they did this, 3% of people purchased the jam. So a lot of people, not much purchase. The next weekend, they did the same exact study. They put jam on the table, but this time they only put three jams on the table. When they did this, less people came up, but 30% of them took action. They actually purchased it, right? And the reason why was because there was less there for them to choose. And that actually reduced the confusion. It was like no longer this paralysis by analysis. And I think that's what happens within our organizations. The same thing, because we are all consumers. Like the people that are in the walls of our company are consumers. And when we look at this data, we are looking at it all and saying, wow, this is interesting, and then walking away from it because we don't know what to do with it. There's way too much information. So I think that becomes like, the real big crux of the problem is that we just have way too much information. That's the first part. And I think the second part of it is that the data that we have is always looking back, right? Data is past, but what is, future? And what does this actually mean? So when we're looking at all this information, we now have a very clear picture of what has happened, but it's a very big picture of looking at what happened. Now, how do we actually move this forward? So it becomes a point where we have way too much data to where now we have to think about, all right, what does this data point mean moving forward? What does that data point mean moving forward? And we have nothing that's helping us really synthesize this information. We don't have the refinement plants. We don't have the gas stations. Stealing that from Michael, which I'm stealing after this episode. I'm using that from now on because it's so good. But basically, we have to take this refine this data and make sure that consumers or our partners within organizations know what to do with this information. They have the story that they can sell and move forward within the organization rather than just having data points. We need something that points to that future. And right now, it's just not there. Now, Abhijit, I know you're doing a lot of great work at Nextlytics. Like, what are some ways that you're solving this?
That's interesting, right? And I believe we're using this analogy of oil and probably sticking to it. And interesting, right? I mean, we were talking about two major problems the industry is facing, right? First, the data silo problem. And the second one is data democratization, wherein data is not accessible to anyone and everyone in the organization, right? I was just speaking with a C-store exec. Interestingly, they have started democratizing their data just a few months back. Now, what that essentially means is someone in the organization is working on a problem statement. They can just go on to the internal portal and just start querying the data. So if as a business user, you're not well versed with SQL, then you have much more other query parameters, user intuitive queries that anyone in the organization can search and get access to that data. The second part is what Matt spoke about, right? Which is, okay, I have access to data, but there's just too much of an overload of it. And that's where we come to the opinionated piece of it. And when I say opinionated, I essentially mean that someone who's consuming the data has a problem statement, has a problem to solve, and how that person will be solving it using the data that is being provided. And that's where we come to the opinionated piece of it, starting with what we call here at Nextlytics is the six pillars of great storytelling, starting with the facts, which essentially most of the BI dashboards present, right? What happened? Let's take an example, right? CAC or CAC, and the BI dashboards will give you, like, say your CAC was $3, right? That's the first pillar of great storytelling. Now, the second pillar is what we call it insights. Now, insights can be of multifold, right? Starting with descriptive insights. When I say descriptive insights, that essentially means is, yeah, your CAC was $3, but how did it reach to $3? Which channels were effective? Which channels were not effective? So that's your descriptive side of insights, where you start drilling down into what that CAC actually means, or what that metric or the KPI actually means. We have seen some dashboards do that. Uh, so it's the industry is gearing towards going through the descriptive side of things. The third one is now you get into the prescriptive side of things, which is more actions or recommendations. Yes, I have seen the facts, I have seen the insights, which is your descriptive side. Now, what do I do with it? So that's your actionable piece, or the third pillar that we say. The fourth pillar is again when we go into the more opinionated piece where you have the end goal. So my end goal is getting my CAC down to $2. Then I know the end goal. I can prescribe the actions according to the end goal. And that's what we call simulations, which is I have my end goal and I say I need to get my CAC down to $2. Now here are the 10 things you need to do, which makes your actions much more impactful and not vague and over the top. Now, the fifth one is much more from I would say, I get into the AI piece now or the LLMs piece now, right? Think of um, a C-level exec who might not have half an hour or hours to look at the dashboard. For them, we now include exec summaries, right? And finally, the sixth pillar is prompts. We keep the prompts as the sixth pillar and the final pillar, mainly because what we have seen, and this was a theme maybe later part of last year, wherein all the companies were trying to go, and the analogy I like to use is you have the complete left side of the spectrum, which is traditional BI dashboards, and you have the complete right side of the spectrum, which is full blown prompts, right? You just put in the data and start asking questions. And we at Nextlytics always feel that both of them are two extremes, and there has to be a middle ground, because asking questions is one thing, but consider a person who's a non-tech person getting access to the data and getting access to the prompt, and then the first question that that person might have is, okay, what do I ask it, right? I mean, um, there has to be some hand holding, there has to be a collaborative effort that needs to be done in order to make that prompt effective. And that's where our fifth pillar is, which is much more contextual prompt, that you have those facts, you have those five pillars, which gives the person or the role that is consuming those five pillars much data and much data points and much query points to now go to the prompt and say, okay, now ask me questions based on what you have seen, and I'll try to answer that to you. So that's the sixth pillar that we say, which is the prompts angle. And these six pillars combined is what do we start calling it now, right? Because we can't call it dashboards. It's an uplift or an uptick to what the traditional BI dashboards are, and that's where I believe we call it a storyboard, right? We don't call it a dashboard here at Nextlytics, because it kind of uplifts your metric or your KPI to give the complete story behind it, to make it much more actionable, and to make it much more consumable.
Yeah, no, I think, it's important to note that it's not just that we're calling it storyboard instead of dashboard. What we're really trying to get people to think about is the dashboard is the information or the data engine that tells you, if you want to know what happened yesterday, what's happening right now. But there's a story to be told. And the story is what's happening an hour from now, 12 hours from now, a day from now, a week from now, right? And I grew up with dreams of being an artist when I was young, until I found out that I literally can't draw a circle like or a square perfectly. So that was a pretty good indication that my talents would lie elsewhere. And so I kind of took up writing is my artistic endeavor. So I found writing to be my creative outlet. And, whether I'm writing fiction or nonfiction, whether it's one of my books or an article, the principles are still the same. It's the human principle of, we all react to stories that have a protagonist, an antagonist, a major conflict, and a resolution, right? And we also all identify with the hero's journey stories, right? So if you think about Star Wars as being the uber, modern myth, how you go through this. So, but the point is, you have to have that walkthrough, that's something that's compelling. And frankly, you look for cues in what you've already written as a writer for where you want to take the story going forward. That's the difference between just having a dashboard, which only about 17% of executives ever adopt and use, and having a dashboard that produces a storyboard. So now you can visualize, right? Because listen, think about the world we live in commerce today, right? When we're asking ourselves in the industry, what's next, whether you're a brand manager or, you're running a retail shop, when we asked ourselves 10 years ago, what's next? We meant, what are we planning out for the next 3 months, 6 months, a year out, right? That's what next was. Now, what's next is what's happening 4 hours from now. We don't know what's going to blow up on TikTok at 5 p.m. We don't know what we're going to wake up to on Temu at 7 a.m., right? And so as you're trying to tell your story, you're constantly looking for, well, what's next on social? What's next on my website? What's next in my retail store? Well, your dashboard isn't going to tell you what's next, but the storyboard does. And to me, that's where I think, we as an industry could move forward very well, is adopting that data, dashboard, storyboard model, right? Where were you? Where are you? Where do you want to go? And that what next comes, right? And even further, if you think about the paradigm that retail exists in today, right? It's even more important to have that what's next storyboard because, right, it's basically now the new retail model is the model, right? So the full integration of online, offline technology, supply chain, and media. Well, if that's your model, then you've got five major sources of data from an integrated ecosystem. Then we move into unified commerce. Well, if you can't even unify your data and you can't unify your people around what's next, how do you even approach unified commerce? And then the kicker is now with the emergence of social commerce and TikTok shop and individuals who can act as retailers with a phone, okay? Now there's 100 more data points you just added to the mix. So your what's next is coming from the new retail model, unified commerce, social commerce, and individual people acting as retailers. So I don't know about you guys, but I'd much rather have a storyboard to tell me what's next than me to just be left to my own devices and shoot in the dark on what's next.
Yeah, there's so many different directions that you can go next, right? So yeah, you need that guidance. And I believe storyboards is definitely the best way to get there. If you think about it, like what moves people of all ages? Stories, right? So our ancestors sat around fires telling stories. It's still something that works really, really well. I keynote speak. What I do on stage, I tell stories because that's what's going to get people to remember the lessons and take action from it. So stories is something that is highly effective, especially in the corporate world. And I tell you one thing for sure is that if you do not control the story, if you do not have one clean narrative that's going to help the business, others will define your story. So take hold and tell the story. Make sure that everyone's aligned with that same story. That is when you have the best success, the most innovation in your organization is when you have one clear story.
Matt, do you want to talk us about, because I feel there is some connect here between what we are talking today and the book that you're writing at this point of time. Do you want to talk that about a bit before we do the final conclusions?
Sure. Yeah. So, I just started writing a new book. The first one, The Mindful Innovator, helps retailers and CPG companies really get into how do I become more mindful and be more present about the moment to make sure I'm making the right direction forward. But now we're getting closer into the consumer, and my book now, the new book I'm writing right now, is how to read your consumers' minds in 5 days. And in this book here, we're talking about using data in a very different way to understand where they're going to go next, right? Because what consumers do and how they decide things, 85% of it happens in the subconscious mind, right? They can't tell you. The data can't even show you, where they're going to be in the future. It's reading those subconscious threads that are happening behind the scenes. So we're helping leaders to really embrace the fact they should be going into the homes of shoppers, into the stores with consumers, to really focus in on looking at the things that are not said, that subtext type of research, right? To really understand, like, what are the directions they are moving forward with. But it all comes down to just really simplifying and stop over analyzing and really just get what are those tiny clues that are telling you that it's going in this direction.
That's quite interesting, right? I mean, in one of the next episodes of Beyond Analytics, we'll be doing a good demo about this storytelling aspect. Because what I feel typically is that a lot of industry talks about storytelling as a as a theoretical framework, but not a lot of them explain the practicalities of it, right? What exactly does it mean in the meat and the flesh? And that's what we'll be doing in one of the next episodes at Beyond Analytics, where we'll run down a use case, and I believe the use case is something that Michael spoke about, which is the social influence aspect of it, the creator economy that he speaks about, and we'll be giving a quick demo about how this means from a storytelling aspect, and how this kind of comes all together in one storyboard. So stay tuned for that. And thanks a lot, Michael. Thanks a lot, Matt. It was a great pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Abhijit.
Thank you.